Our next topics for discussion will be California Mechanical Code Chapters 10 and 11, which cover boilers and pressure vessels and refrigeration systems, respectively. We'll start by talking about Chapter 10, which is boilers and pressure vessels. This section is somewhat specialized, and we rarely see these in either school or essential services buildings, but it does apply to potable water heaters with capacities greater than 120 gallons, heat input which exceeds 200,000 BTUs per hour, and is used for hot water supply which exceeds 160 psi and 210 degrees Fahrenheit. A couple of requirements are the boiler room certainly requires a floor drain, and the boiler drain pipes are required to discharge via indirect wastes. Some detailed requirements relating to boilers and pressure vessels are the fact that steam boilers are required to have a pressure gauge and a water level glass. Water boilers are required to have a pressure gauge and a temperature indicator, and that welding processes performed on pressurized vessels are required to be performed by certified welders. Similar to what's required for smaller water heaters, safety or relief valve discharge precautions must be implemented. Specifically, listed pressure relief valve is required to be installed, and discharge from the relief valves must not be obstructed in any way, which means there should be no valves, no traps, no mechanical barriers, and certainly no freezing potential, etc. The piping that is used after the relief outlet must be the same size as the outlet on the relief outlet, and it's got to continue undiminished in size and end up pointing down to the receptor with an unthreaded end. And obviously enough, the reason that there's an unthreaded end on the piping is to continue to make it less likely that anyone would be tempted to put a cap or a valve or any other fitting on the end of the outlet for the discharge. The discharge is also going to be discharged by gravity via an air gap or to the outside of the building, located between 6 inches minimum and 24 inches maximum above finished grade. Additionally, if the discharge water temperature exceeds 212 degrees Fahrenheit, then a splash shield is also required to be provided. Either a low water cutoff or a flow sensing device is required at the outlet piping. These devices basically prevent the boiler from becoming damaged in a condition where the water level is low or the flow is low or reduced. It also permits testing of the fuel supply cutoff without draining the system. Operating adjustments and instructions are also another very important consideration, and most of that responsibility relies with the installing contractor. Specifically, the installing contractor is required to set and adjust the boiler controls, test the boiler installation, provide a complete control diagram for the entire boiler system, and also provide a complete boiler operating instructions, or the O&M manual, to the owner. Section 1013 identifies the required inspections and tests that need to be performed on the boilers or the pressure vessels. Typically it follows a standard process where the owner must notify the authority having jurisdiction when the the system is ready to be tested, and the owner must post a sign that basically states, "Warning, this installation has not been inspected and approved by the AHJ and shall not be covered or concealed until so inspected and approved." At the conclusion of the inspection, the approved inspection, then the operating permit may be issued. There's one additional item that is worth considering when we're talking about boilers or pressure vessels, and that has to do with the associated fire alarm system. Specifically the fact that smoke detectors are typically required to be installed at the ceiling space in occupied areas, and smoke detectors are known for being susceptible to steam or fog or condensation that may collect in a variety of areas. So it is certainly important to be aware that this is a potential, and in the event that during operation of the actual boiler equipment or pressure vessel, if the fire alarm system begins to be triggered, then it would certainly be acceptable to for the design professional or the owner to submit a CCD to DSA requesting that the affected smoke detectors be replaced with heat detectors. But again, it's very important to remember that the design professionals are going to make that decision, and that since this topic is a fire life safety topic, the correction for the deficiency must be submitted as a construction change document to DSA for review and approval prior to any changes of the fire life safety system being made by the contractor. Now we're going to go ahead and begin discussing California Mechanical Code Chapter 11, which deals specifically with refrigeration. Similar to the previous Chapter 10, these are very specialized systems. These are generally very large systems and are employed in areas where large quantities of refrigerated air are required. And it wouldn't be surprising to see a system such as this, a refrigeration system of this magnitude, installed possibly on a community college campus, but they are very, very odd and very rare to see. Because they are such specialized systems, it's important to stress that the project inspector must rely very heavily on the approved plans for any type of refrigeration system, and that verification by the project inspector for compliance with the manufacturer's installation instructions is extremely important. One of the important topics for refrigeration type area or system installation is that access, required access for personnel, is strictly adhered to. Specifically, unobstructed, readily accessible opening and passageways, 36 inches wide by 80 inches high minimum, must be provided to portions of the system that require excuse me, routine maintenance. And there are a few exceptions to this accessibility requirement, and there's 4 of them precisely, and they should also be reviewed. This slide shows an image of generally what we're talking about. We're talking about a refrigeration type system. These are quite large systems. They're very unique, and they will typically occupy an area that is very distinct and separated from other systems. In areas where these large refrigeration systems are being constructed, a couple of important considerations are illumination and also service receptacle accessibility. Generally, permanent lighting is required with controls located at the access entrance, with a few exceptions, and they are: if the building lighting provides the required illumination, then additional permanent lighting is not going to be required. And if the equipment is located on roofs or exterior walls, of course there are allowances for permanent lighting and the required controls. Section 1105.5 addresses the important requirement for the ability to ventilate these refrigeration rooms, specifically where condensing units are located. And this is primarily required because of the toxic nature of the refrigerant itself. And the requirements are that permanent gravity ventilation openings of 2 square feet minimum are required, opening directly to the outside or via continuous ducts. Or these rooms would require a mechanical exhaust system that provides a complete air change every 20 minutes minimum that discharges to the outside. It's also important to note that with the 2019 edition of the California Mechanical Code, there were several amendments added to this particular chapter, and they are worth noting, but we're not going to go into them in great detail. It is important to know that there were some changes, and it is worth reviewing these in the event that you do end up inspecting a project that has a large refrigeration system installed in it. These topics are the ones that have received some significant amendments: access, openings, which would include detectors and alarms, and as well as refrigerant detectors, and ventilation, specifically mechanical and emergency ventilation. And similar to the general requirements that we just mentioned on the previous slide, there have also been some significant amendments to special requirements for refrigeration systems. Those include topics such as flame-producing devices, doors, walls, floors, and ceilings, exterior openings, sealing, ventilation, detectors, and also remote control provisions. Upon completion of the installation of the refrigeration systems, field tests are required to be conducted, ensuring the safety and correct operation of these systems. All refrigerant-containing parts of the refrigeration system must be tested and proved tight before they are operated. And the contractor is required to use table 1116.2 and the parameters contained therein for verifying the pressure tests are completed appropriately. Dry nitrogen or other non-flammable, non-reactive dried gas is the only test media approved for use. No oxygen or air or mixtures of either oxygen or air are permitted to be used during these pressure tests. Again, as with everything, there are some exceptions to this, and 4 exceptions are provided in section 1116.3 that should be reviewed. At the conclusion of the test, obviously, the contractor is going to, or their subcontractor performing the tests, is going to provide a document that verifies that the required tests have been completed and approved, and it's certainly important that the project inspector obtains and retains a copy of this document in their job file. Additionally, a dated signed test declaration from the installer is required if the system contains greater than or equal to 55 pounds worth of refrigerant. This slide shows a very simplified version of a system that does require some refrigerant. It's certainly less than 55 pounds worth, and it is a very simple mistake, an easily corrected mistake, but somewhat common with the advent of zip ties and congested areas above ceilings. So what the image is depicting is may have been a quick temporary installation or support for a refrigerant line, fastening it to a hanger for another component, and perhaps it was forgot, and who knows all the details. But again, it's a very simple picture. Certainly it's important enough to identify and remind the contractor that this type of support is not permitted for sure for actually any type of refrigerant or water line, piping, steam, anything like that, conduits, etc.